So I'll pray the prayer for the celebration, the feast that we are celebrating at the table with St. Dominic. O God, our Creator and Redeemer, in prayer we lift our praise, blessing, and preaching. 800 years ago, you called St. Dominic to enter eternal life and to join you at the table. As we celebrated this Jubilee, fill us with grace so that we may realize our mission. Help us nourish your people with truth, mercy, and love. We ask this as one Dominican family through the pleas of Mary and in the name of Jesus. Amen.
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 Thank you. So I just want to acknowledge that we have people here from Cape Town, Durban, East London, Australia, Pietermaritzburg, Switzerland, Zimbabwe, Zambia, England, Johannesburg, and even Springs and Brakpan. So we've come from all over, and we are grateful to our Dominican brothers, to Martin, for hosting it. We are sitting in the chapel in Springs, and Martin is hosting it, so welcoming you all as you come in. So the timetable today, we will soon listen to our brother Martin speaking, and then there will be an opportunity to break up into groups and have a discussion in groups, and then we'll come back into the large group. We'll talk about times as we go along, and maybe have some interaction or if there are any questions. And then we'll break for lunch. Oh, I think in between we have to break for tea. Maybe after Martin's talk, we'll break for tea. We'll tell you how many minutes when we get that far. After we've had a plenary session, we will have a break for lunch. And then the one thing that will be for sure is that we'll meet again at 2:00, and we'll allow our leaders, congregational leaders or regional and general leaders, to speak to us, share any news with us from the different congregations, and then we will celebrate the Eucharist together. So now I'd like to hand over to Terry, who is going to, Terry Sacker, one of our associates for those who don't know her. Dr. Terry Sacker is going to introduce our brother Martin. Thank you.
Good morning, sisters and brothers. Good morning to all the women I know as I love them, and to all the women I love because I don't yet know them. I've been given the privilege to introduce our speaker this morning, Father Martinez Samuel Badenhorst. He is a Dominican. He's a Dominican, a parish priest, an academic, an educator, as well as a student. He grew up in Durban, KwaZulu-Natal, where he completed his schooling. He has a bachelor's degree in theology from the St. Joseph Scholasticate in Sedara, and a licentiate in sacred theology from the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas. Currently, he is working on his doctorate at St. Augustine College, South Africa. He lectures at St. Augustine College, South Africa, as well as the Dumini Universitas. Every time I hear his presentations, I'm delighted, inspired, and challenged to think, contemplate, and act in transforming ways. Whether he's talking about the lost motherhood of God, Hildegard van Bingen, and the healing of the church, or truth and Catholic social teaching. The Dominican family is blessed to embrace Father Martinez. He is multi-talented and pursues many interests. He lives with artistry and generously shares his sense of wonder of the world. The mystic Hedwig van Brandt, her insight resonates with the ways in which Father Martinez inspires me in my life, where she says, I swim to the shore only to find that you have enlarged the sea. You have left me days with more desire and give me more muscle to swim again towards you. So Martin, we welcome you and we are looking forward to your insight and your wisdom and the joy that we will gain from hearing you preach. Thank you.
All right, Siri, thanks very much for that introduction. I'm not quite sure who was introduced. I'd like to meet that person. But I'm very grateful for your kind words. Thank you, Terry. So let us start. I'd like to preface this talk with a quote from the Aeneid by the great Latin poet Virgil. There are tears at the heart of things. Virgil pictures Aeneas recognizing in a frieze painted on a wall of Queen Dido's palace the Trojan Wars. The violence and jealousies of the Trojan War, which gave him such grief, gave even the people in far Sidonia cause for grief. The inhumanity and suffering of anyone touches the hearts of all. Therefore, Aeneas's cry from the heart, there are tears in the heart of things. This cry from the heart is echoed in Pope Francis's Fratelli Tutti of 3 October 2020. If everything is connected, it is hard to imagine that this global disaster is unrelated to our way of approaching reality. Our claim to be absolute masters of our own lives and of all that exists. I do not want to speak of divine retribution, nor would it be sufficient to say that the harm we do to nature is itself the punishment for our offenses. The world is itself crying out in rebellion, and we are reminded of the well-known verse of the poet Virgil that evokes the tears of things, this misfortunes of life and of history. Our claim to be absolute master of our own lives and all that exists, to use the words of Pope Francis, lies at the heart of the call to conversion, to a greater humility, to realize that we are not masters, we are participants. Throughout the history of theology and even into the pontificate of recent popes, there has been a far too narrow reading of the fundamental blessing of our creation to imply this very mastery so clearly called into question. In Genesis 1, verse 28, we hear, "Be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it." This is repeated as a command in Genesis 9:7, when Noah and his sons are given the command to repopulate the earth. What many miss is the fact that in Exodus 1 verse 7, this command is already fulfilled. When the 72 descendants of Abraham who went to Egypt were fertile and prolific, they multiplied and increased greatly so that the land was filled with them. This gave rise to the oppression by Pharaoh. The making of covenant with Moses gives a new direction to the people of Israel, which replaces master it. A covenant now giving them responsibility. The blessing of fecundity fulfilled is replaced by the blessing of the Torah, new responsibilities. That aspect of responsibility arising from fulfilling a blessing or commandment, that blessings and commandments have a sell-by date, is often not acknowledged. The blessing is taken to be a carte blanche. One sees it in the presentations of Pope St. John Paul II on the theology of the body. For example, his catechetical presentation of the 14th of November 1979, he says, "In the mystery of creation, on the basis of the original and constituent solitude of his being, man," and that's what the Pope said, "was endowed with a deep unity between what is, humanly and through the body, male in him, and what is, equally humanly and through the body, female in him."
So you are here now.
On all this, right from the beginning, the blessing of fertility descended, linked with human procreation. There are also hints of human exceptionalism to the order of creation, even as humanity has its place in the created realm. Once again, in the same series that he presented, St. John Paul II on the 12th of September had said, "Man," and that is what the Pope said, "is created on earth together with the visible world. But at the same time, the Creator orders him to subdue and have dominion over the earth." Refer Genesis 1:28. "Therefore he is placed over the world. Even though man," and that is what the Pope said, "is strictly bound to the visible world, the biblical narrative does not speak of his likeness to the rest of creatures, but only to God. God created man in his own image, in the image of God.
There's 81 participants. 81.
The responsibility given in the Torah is not often mentioned in Christian teaching through the ages, and including the works of St. John Paul II. Responsibility, such as demanding a stable population for the land of promise. So, just to pick up again, responsibility in the Torah demands a stable population for the land of promise, as the inheritance laws clearly imply the limiting of progeny because land and possessions are not infinitely divisible, and all land resets ownership on the Jubilee. The Jewish Mishnah demands as a mitzvah, as a commandment, one son and one daughter from a marriage. For God created them, male and female. Further children are encouraged, and we must realize it is in the context of high infant and maternal mortality that this encouragement is given. The laws of kashrut, what determines that is kosher to eat, also limit the eating of animals to those animals already domesticated in the second millennium before Christ. There is no need to hunt lion, hippo, and pangolin, or to eat a bat. These laws of communion with others and the environment were to be lived in such a way that others would be drawn into the community of the sheer integrity of life being lived under the covenant. That did not quite work out the way it was intended. The teaching of Christ touches not at all on fecundity, only on fidelity. Fidelity to the fulfillment of the covenant, which sees, as in the great hymns of Isaiah, a state of peace, of plenty, of enough, rooted in agape. That is the divine love which brings responsibility and transcendence to the human experience of eros, our desire to copulate, storge, the loyalty to family and clan, and philia, the friendship between equals. Later in the writings of St. Thomas Aquinas, the human experience of philia is the closest experience we can have to transcendent love. Eros and storge do not have an element of choice or reason. Philia is a rational choice. Transcendent love, agape, of itself is responsible for and has the gift of seeing the connection between things. Our unloving attitude leads to disconnection, thus exploitation and degradation. So the vision which brings to the Apostle Peter a change of heart, that of there being no unclean animals, the vision of Acts 10, verses 9 to 16, carries with it a responsibility for the good news to all of creation. Israel, living the example of the Torah, must now be replaced by the universal law of love, which embraces the so-called unclean, the Gentiles, and everything in the realm of creation. In fact, their replace is not quite the right word, fulfills the Torah by embracing everything in the realm of creation. Medieval theologians like Thomas Aquinas emphasized the continuity of life, to respect what is uniquely human. All that makes the person must be taken into account. In De Principiis Natura, Aquinas, discussing the relationship of the end form of God's creative acts with their origins, emphasizes the continuity, even when there are qualitative differences. Moreover, he says, it must be observed that that which is more universal is always called the remote cause. For example, we say that the proximate form of man is his definition, namely rational animal, but animal is more remote and substance is still more remote. All superiors are forms of the inferiors. When he deals with this in the Summa, Thomas expands by using a picture. Thus, the intellectual soul contains virtually whatever belongs to the sensitive soul of brute animals and to the nutritive soul of plants. Therefore, as a surface, which is of a pentagonal shape, is not tetragonal, four-sided by one shape and pentagonal by another, since a tetragonal shape would be superfluous as contained in the pentagonal, so neither is Socrates a man by one soul, an animal by another, but by one and the same soul, he is both animal and man. We are both. The both and aspect of humanity is central to Thomas's thought. We are not exempt from nature, but through our rational faculty, we have the wisdom to understand nature and our place in it as natural creatures. Thus, we have a greater responsibility for the good of all things in nature. For Thomas, what gets in the way is the fact that what we desire is not the common good. We desire what is good for me. Our rational potential is universal. Our desire is limited by our immediate context, as it is for any animal. So with the limited desire for my own good that arises from irrational self-interest inherent in animals, we place ourselves outside nature as a special case, and so cause untold harm to ourselves and nature. I'd like to quote here Robert Evans, And it's from an article, if not genetics, then what? In a book, Why Are Some People Healthy and Others Not? And he writes, as a medical researcher, there is a chain that runs from the behavior of cells and molecules to the health of populations and back again. A chain in which the past and the present social environments of individuals and their perceptions of those environments constitute a key set of links. No one would pretend that the chain is fully understood or is likely to be for a considerable time to come. But the research evidence currently available no longer permits anyone to deny its existence. In only one thing would I disagree with Robert Evans, saying that the chain is not fully understood. The mechanics of the chain is not fully understood. That's true. The implications of the chain has long been understood and woefully ignored. The chain implies human responsibility and requires rational and truthful investigation. We see how the requirements of responsibility and rational and truthful investigation are dishonored in our global village of instant conspiracy theories, political capital, exploitative capitalism, and sheer selfishness. The Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist Laurie Garrett has written extensively on public health crises. Her 1994 work, The Coming Plague, was prescient. I quote her two closing paragraphs. While the human race battles itself, fighting over ever more crowded turf and scarcer resources, the advantage moves to the microbes. They are our predators, and they will be victorious if we, Homo sapiens, do not learn how to live in a rational global village that affords the microbes few opportunities. It is either that, she concludes in her book, or we brace ourselves for the coming plague. We did neither, and live in a planet-wide lockdown as a result. In her later work, Betrayal of Trust of 2000, the closing paragraphs are now prophetic. Were a biological attack to occur, or a naturally rising epidemic, the public would have only one visible direction in which to place its trust, with its local, national, and global public health infrastructure. If such an interlaced system did not exist at a time of grave need, it would constitute an egregious betrayal of trust. To build trust, there must be a sense of community, and the community must collectively believe in its own future. At the millennium, much of humanity hungered for connectedness and community, but lived isolated, even hostile existences. Trust evaporated when Tutsis met Hutus, Serbs confronted Kosovars, African Americans worked with white Americans, or Estonians argued with Russians. The new globalization pushed communities against one another, opening old wounds and historic hatreds, often with genocidal results. It would be up to public health to find ways to bridge the hatreds, bringing the world toward a sense of singular community in which the health of each one member rises or falls with the health of all others. To build trust, there must be a sense of community. Yet our world is based on the principles of exploitation and competition. What can help towards a cure? Phrasing the question differently, What if we started economics not with its long-established theories, but with humanity's long-term goals, and then sort out the economic thinking that would enable us to achieve them? The economist Kate Raworth, in her book, Donut Economics, 7 Ways to Think Like a 21st Century Economist. And that is the donut economy. In the center, we have the social foundation, what needs to satisfy human existence. On the outside, we have the ecological ceiling, what the world can support. What economy and economists need to aim at is that balance of the living green, the safe and just space for humanity. Raworth's representation of an economy which balances human well-being with planetary limits gives rise to the title of Donut Economics. Human well-being is contained in the sphere of natural limits. We depend on nature, and nature depends on us for the balance, giving rise to well-being. And this needs to be held with a certain reverence and love, as illustrated 9 centuries ago by Hildegard von Bingen. The red figure on the outside of the drawing of humanity in the world is Charity. She is situated under God, the head at the top, and holds all things in balance and in being. And her donut is a lot more colorful than Raworth's, yet the same idea of balance, containment, and harmony in love and community is shown to us. So we explore Raworth's ideas in the light of our deep intuition of our belonging to the world and the search for community. I will let her speak for herself, because there are 7 aspects to the donut economy. First, change the goal. For over 70 years, economics has been fixated on GDP, or national output, as its primary measure of progress. That fixation has been used to justify extreme inequalities of income and wealth, coupled with unprecedented destruction of the living world. For the 21st century, a far bigger goal is needed, meeting the human rights of every person within the means of our life-giving planet. And that goal is encapsulated in the concept of the donut. The challenge now is to create economies, local to global, that help to bring all of humanity into the donut's safe and just space. Instead of pursuing ever-increasing GDP, it is time to discover how to thrive in balance. Second, see the big picture. Mainstream economics depicts the whole economy with just one extremely limited image, the one on the left there, the circular flow diagram. Its limitations have, furthermore, been used to reinforce a neoliberal narrative about the efficiency of the market, the incompetence of the state, the domesticity of the household, and the tragedy of the commons, the common resources. It is time to draw the economy anew, embedding it within society and within nature, empowered by the sun. This new depiction invites new narratives about the power of the market, the partnership of the state, the core role of the household, and the creativity of the commons. Third, nurture human nature. At the heart of 20th century economics stands the portrait of rational economic man. He has told us that we are self-interested, isolated, calculating, fixed in taste and dominant over nature. And his portrait has shaped who we have become. But human nature is far richer than this. As early sketches of our new self-portrait reveal, we are social, interdependent, approximating, fluid in values, and dependent upon the living world. What is more, it is indeed possible to nurture human nature in ways that give us a far greater chance of getting into the donut's safe and just space. Fourth, get savvy with systems. The iconic crisscross of the market supply and demand curves is the first diagram that every economics student encounters. But it is rooted in misplaced 19th century metaphors of mechanical equilibrium. A far smarter starting point for understanding the economy's dynamism is systems thinking, summed up by a simple pair of feedback loops. Putting such dynamics at the heart of economics opens up many new insights, from the boom and bust of financial markets to the self-reinforcing nature of economic inequality and the tipping points of climate change. It is time to stop searching for the economy's exclusive control levers and start stewarding it as an ever-evolving complex system. Fifth, designed to distribute. In the 20th century, one simple curve, the Kuznets curve, whispered a powerful message on inequality. It has to get worse before it can get better. And growth will eventually even it up. But inequality, it turns out, is not an economic necessity. It is a design failure. 21st century economists will recognize that there are many ways to design economies to be far more distributive of the value that they generate. An idea best represented as a network of flows. It means going beyond redistributing income to exploring ways of redistributing wealth, particularly the wealth that lies in controlling land, enterprise, technology, knowledge, and the power to create money. Sixth, create to regenerate. Economic theory has long portrayed a clean environment as a luxury good, affordable only for the well-off. This view was reinforced by the environmental Kuznets curve, which once again whispered that pollution has to get worse before it can get better, and growth will eventually clean it up. But there is no such law. Ecological degradation is simply the result of degenerative industrial design. The century needs economic thinking that unleashes regenerative design in order to create a circular, not linear economy, and to restore humans as full participants in Earth's cyclical processes of life. And finally, in the donut, be agnostic about growth. One diagram in economic theory is so dangerous that it is never actually drawn. The long-term path of GDP growth, which you see on the left there. Mainstream economics views endless economic growth as a must, that nothing in nature grows forever. And the attempt to buck that trend is raising tough questions in high income but low growth countries. It may not be hard to give up having GDP growth as an economic goal, but it is going to be far harder to overcome our addiction to it. Today, we have economies that need to grow, whether or not they make us thrive. What we need are economies that make us thrive, whether or not they grow. That radical flip in perspective invites us to become agnostic about growth and to explore how economies that are currently financially, politically, and socially addicted to growth could learn to live with it or without it. So there we have the whole 7 aspects. So what is called for in brief is a global change of mind, from autonomy to community, from exploitation to reverence, from indifference to passion. It is no wonder that Pope Francis recommends her views together with those of Mariana Mazzucato, her book, The Value of Everything, Making and Taking in the Global Economy, comes from 2018, and Mariana's other book was published yesterday.
Wow.
The Pope recommends these 2 economists in his latest book, Let Us Dream. And I was quite surprised to find that in Let Us Dream, because I stumbled over Rawworth and her donut quite a while ago and have been fascinated by it, and then suddenly find she's on a commission advising the Pope on economics. Well, that's the way the world works. And so for us then, as part of a religious family, what about us? We are reminded by Pope Francis in his letter to religious of 2015 that we, the religious, those attached to institutes of consecrated life in whatever expression, are to be experts in communion. The earliest portrait of St. Dominic is the one that forms the theme of this 800th anniversary year of his heavenly birth. It is one of St. Dominic in table communion, painted on the refectory table used by St. Dominic in Bologna. And he is pictured with over 40 of the brothers. He is not a solitary saint. He is saint in fellowship. That places before us the challenge to respond to this iconic truth. St. Dominic is presented among others in a nurturing and community setting. He is not pictured as president of the chapter, nor as teacher, nor as the preacher. He is pictured as companion, one among the joy of being together. One among the joy of being together, not only at the level of the community, but also within the whole order of the cosmos under God. St. Dominic's time was plagued by the Albigensian heresy, which forced an insurmountable separation between the material and the spiritual. Only the soul had value. The body and all that sustained it, the cosmos entire, was evil. Here we have the truth greater than the narrow view of the heresy. Dominic in the body, among the body of his companions, celebrating with food and drink their belonging to it. For the Albigensians, there was no fellowship with the world or ordered creation. The human person did not partake. The human person could only escape. So now we face the new wave of Albigensianism, capitalism of the late 20th century and the early 21st century. Its doctrine of limitless profits comes at the cost of human community and the planet's resources. Garrett, our correspondent about disease and epidemic, writes in the style of a detective and espionage novel, and she clearly gives account of the failings of the medical system largely focused on profit and not on public health. The failure of political systems, rampant with corruption, which leave the vulnerable without resources, and an economy which strips the planet of its protective mechanisms in chasing the unreachable goal of unlimited growth. And so many of the choices we face seem like an Albigensianism either or. In South Africa, our response to COVID sacrifices the economy for the sake of public health. In the USA, public health is sacrificed for the sake of the economy. Neither approach is the answer, as we discover to our horror. These are the figures of deaths per 100,000 in each of the countries. You can see United Kingdom, Czechia, Italy, United States, and amongst other countries, both developed and developing, South Africa in the top numbers, 700 per 100,000. These approaches are based on conquering the pandemic. And we have to learn to live in a state of pandemic until the safety of the donut can surround us. We have to learn to live in this state until there is a just balance between our human needs and the resources available to us. This is not the first pandemic since the Spanish flu to come into global consciousness. We forget so soon that COVID has followed Bolivian hemorrhagic fever, 1961, Marburg fever, yellow fever, and Brazilian meningitis in 67, Lassa fever in 74, Ebola in 76, and several times since then, swine flu and Legionnaire's disease in 76, HIV in 1980 in the United States, and most probably starting in 1959 in Europe, toxic shock syndrome in 82 and following years, drug-resistant staph and TB, 1977, escalating through the 80s to today. Lyme disease in the 70s and 80s, Hunter virus in 1993, and so forth. So why are we caught unawares? Why is it an either-or sacrifice we face? Dominic faced the heresy of his time with the answer of community, celebrating the good things of the earth. Vow to a poverty which supports and does not exploit, a chastity which takes responsibility for human desire, and an obedient reverence to our place in the world under God. What gives rise to pandemics, other than a microorganism's facility in infection, is the failure of human community. When a disease starts in the developing world, persons there are judged for lack of hygiene, knowledge, culture, civilization, and so forth. When a pandemic hits the developed world, it is either denied or explained by conspiracy theory that seeks for and simply shifts blame. It's not us, it's the Chinese. The need for community to stand together in mutual nurturing and protection is simply ignored. The new face of Albigensianism is each for themselves and the devil take the hindmost. To quote Fratelli Tutti 36, unless we recover the shared passion to create a community of belonging and solidarity worthy of our time, our energy and our resources, the global illusion that misled us will collapse and leave many in the grip of anguish and emptiness. Nor should we naively refuse to recognize that obsession with the consumerist lifestyle, above all, when few people are capable of maintaining it, can only lead to violence and mutual destruction, which comes from Laudato Si. The notion of every man for himself, as it is written here, will rapidly degenerate into a free-for-all that would prove worse than any pandemic. In the face of this, of course, there are tears in the heart of all things. There are tears in the heart of our own Dominican life, the Reverencing in our own bosom, so to speak. Our recent chapter of the Brethren identified 3 manifestations of this disease in our community. I quote from the Acts of 2019, paragraph 71. First of all, growing individualism. It is in the air around us, a cultural feature of our time. It is fueled in part by new technologies, which allows us to be emotionally far from the actual place in which we are physically. Paragraph 72. Second, the fragility of community life. Living in communion and sharing the preaching is the great fulfillment of the Dominican vocation. It is our first preaching. Dominican life essentially includes the experience and practice of community. That is why the most realistic name for communion in the midst of our frailties is that of mercy, compassion, reconciliation, and mutual support. It is necessary to seek unity in difference. And thirdly, and finally, from the actor, the obstacle of excessive apostolic activism and all kinds of activism. This phenomena has occurred and has been frequently criticized in many members of the post-conciliar generation. It is necessary to value what has been and continues to exist in those having an apostolic zeal and generous dedication to the service of humanity. But when this activism leads to individualism in the apostolate, to abandonment of community life, to forgetting the common good, it becomes a real obstacle that ends the synergy of life and mission. This final description of our communal dis-ease also contains the answer, synergy of life and mission. They are not in conflict, they are in communion. The synergy of human flourishing and the limits of creation, the synergy of realizing our special place in the order of grace and our mundane place in the order of creation, the synergy of both ends. Our general chapter indicates to us that we are not immune from the streams at work in society. To be experts in communion means to work hard at the synergies of our lives. Our Dominican life is a microcosm, and it is tasked to be the microcosm of the life of beatitude at a table with God. And it can become a microcosm of the divisions and dis-ease of our society and time. So for us too, as the shoe of our fits, there is a need for a change in mind. It is apparent that more and more practical alternatives to the current lack of community and solidarity with one another and nature are coming to the fore. We have as Dominicans a response to the needs of our times, which is as pertinent as it was in the time of St. Dominic. To love the world, one another, and our place at the table of creation. This implies a change of heart and mind, since the heresies of the age infect us as well, a necessary change. In the words of the comic teacher and poet Taylor Mali, writing of the experience of an 8th grader coming to great change of mind and heart, he writes in his poem, Lily Like Wilson, and the 8th grade mind is a beautiful thing. Like a newborn baby's face, you can often see it change before your very eyes. I can't believe I'm saying this, Mr. Mali, but I think I'd like to switch sides. And I want to tell her to do more than just believe it, but to enjoy it. That changing your mind is one of the best ways of finding out whether or not you still have one. Or even that minds are like parachutes, that it doesn't matter what you pack them with, so long as they open at the right time. In this 800th year of the heavenly birth of St. Dominic, we are called to that table of grace with St. Dominic. Of course, we will soon sit at the table of our common eatings, divided as we are and united as the internet makes us. We will sit at the table of grace in the celebration of the Eucharist, and it must change us, as the bread and wine are changed, to bring praise, blessing, and joy to the tears in the heart of all things. We belong, we are a part of, we celebrate, we change with each other at the table with St. Dominic, at the table of the Lord. Thank you.